Hello and welcome to another video, and what a great response to that last one. It's the apparently going to a field with nothing in it is quite interesting. But yeah, it was a very strange day, and it got even stranger, and that is why we're doing this video. And it comes out that I took a wrong turning, okay, and I ended up in a place where I said I would never do a video about. What can I say? It just happened to come across. Honestly, I did not plan to go and do Borley Rectory, okay? It just happened. But before we get into it, thank you for all your support and all your messages. I'm still going through answering the messages from last night's video, and they're brilliant, and going down on deep dives now, and all your posts are so interesting that it gets me thinking, and then I can't sleep. And I start thinking about maybe if all these time things like the Buckfastly and the Ruffin ones were interconnected, could it have been some time shift that they were stuck in? And yeah, rather confusing myself really, but there we go. Anyway, let's get into this video. As always, if you like the videos, hit the thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't. I'm looking down here now, we are 70 subscribers away from 10,000. That's incredible. Just 70 more people we need. So I'm petrified and paranoid that everyone's just going to unsubscribe and we're not going to get to 10,000. But yeah, and thank you for all your hype. So that's been absolutely fantastic. But we are in Borley, and now how we got to Borley is quite bizarre. I went and left Ruffin, went and filmed a video elsewhere up the top, and I was coming down, and he sent me down a road that I've not really been down before, the A134, and I just kept going, and I was like, I didn't come this way. I was like expecting to go back onto like the A12 by Ipswich, and I just kept going, and then Sudbury come up, and I'm like, Sudbury, I must be near Borley Rectory. And I looked up on the map, no lie, I was a roundabout away from the turning for Borley Rectory. And it was quite unusual because the other week I went down a bit of a deep dive of it, and I was looking at all this other stuff, not particularly the rectory itself, but the church and the village hall, which it seems that no one really knew about. So I thought, well, no, fate, I might as well just go there. So I did, and you got a video that I never thought I was going to make because of my own opinions and assumptions, mainly over Harry Price, to be truthful, who is the investigator that took over the house for nearly 10 years and lived in it and done all these investigations. But yeah, I'll let you know my views as we go through it, but we'll start off with the history of the area and the early ghost reportings of the site. Right, so let's set out the foundations for this. So you got Borley Rectory, that is there, double. That one was actually built in 1862. Now this replaced one that burnt down in 1841. That was said to be built on a site of a monastery or something before that. A lot of people dispute that. We do know that there was some remains found after all that building was demolished and looked into, and I think the earliest settlement now was around about 1550. Now we know they've got the church over the road, Borley Church, that was a Saxon church. So in the likelihood, there would have been buildings around that church at that time to serve it, and for the reason for the church being there in the first place. So I have no doubt there was something on the site of Borley Rectory before the original first rectory and obviously the second rectory. Well, I will say, when you get to Borley, the first thing you come across is the village hall. Now, I know a story about that village hall that it seems that the locals didn't know, because talking to the locals on the day, no one was aware of this. This comes from when I was doing research on Colchester Castle. I'm out with a few historians, and we got into a conversation about the rectory and the church. They turned around and said, well, the village hall has got its own story. I was like, well, what's that? And apparently in 1901, a milkmaid lost her life by a kettle. Now apparently this was documented in the church records of how she died. And since then she's meant to haunt that village hall. I'm just going to linger on that point for a minute because Then I heard recently that they don't believe it was a milkmaid killed by a kettle. They believe it was either a maid killed by a kettle or a milkmaid killed by cattle. Easy confusion in that sort of writing, so I picked the bones out of that one, but she is said to haunt the village hall. Then I drove up to the church itself, and of course as you come around the bend you've got the site of where the rectory would be. That is basically nothing there now. There's houses built on the side of what the land would have been, keeping in mind that the rectory covered quite a large area. It was the rectangular rectory with extensions on it, and then this massive gardens that sort of back down onto the farmers' fields. I do go out and walk around the back of the land and the farmers' fields, more than what you see in the video. I won't have a good nose and have no evidence to support what I did, so but yeah, I do appreciate it's private land. I didn't put the drone up. I didn't want to inconvenience the people around that area anymore. I know that they suffer quite a lot of harassment by people going there looking for the ghosts of the rectory. I did treat it with respect, although I did get moaned at for filming the houses along the road. And I guess some people can get upset about that, but they're all historic houses. So for me, you're only a custodian of a historic house and not the real owner of it. It's my own take on it, and I'm just recording it for history. So in 1863 the Reverend turned up. This was Reverend Henry Jewson Ellis Bull. Now he moves in with his family, which is a large family, 14 children, and some that are from illegitimate children that live there as well. He moves in, and during that period of time, visitors to the house, they started hearing footsteps down the hallways. Now some of the kids had heard this, and then Henry heard it himself, and he was quite confused by this. Also during that period of time is that keys would pop out the locks in the doors and just land on the floor with no one around there. There's other things that were reported at the time as well. So one of the children also reported seeing this headless horseman going down the road. Also the figure that kept appearing through one of the windows. Bizarrely, this isn't the first time this had been seen in that area. There had been reports before the rectory had reopened of this headless coachman going through the village. Over the next 3 decades while that family lived there, these events continued to happen, and it'd be more likely the keys popping out the locks, items flying off the shelves and smashing, and this headless horseman. There's also reports of a man that was seen walking across the landing of the rectory and then vanish into one of the doorways. The next notable thing that happened was that Reverend Bull passed away in 1892. His son took over the parish and became the Reverend there himself. He moved in with his wife and his 4 daughters. This will get to the most known report of the nun. This is where you got the 4 daughters going out, and one of the daughters sees the nun walking up the field. They turn out to there's a pagoda there, and as they was walking towards the pagoda, a nun walked out from the pagoda and started walking up the footpath. One of the daughters thought she was going to go and talk to the nun, and as she got close to the nun disappeared. This is the first time we get the reports of this nun that is meant to haunt Borley Rectory. The sisters were quite shocked, and they returned home to report what they'd seen. They described that when they looked at this nun, she was bowing her head down as she was walking as if she was praying. Years later, a member of the Ghost Club Society, Peter Underwood, interviewed the girls, and he described them as very honest, very well-travelled people, and saw people that wouldn't just make something up. In his opinion, he believed that they saw what they saw. Doesn't make it real, but it actually means that the daughters really did believe what they saw. One evening, the organist from the church comes over, that is Ernest Ambrose, and he's having these conversations with the family. He said that the family were totally convinced they have seen this nun walking around the building and on the grounds outside. Unfortunately, in 1928, Reverend Bull passed away, and this is where we get a bit of a gap. What we should know, by this time, the reputation of the rectory was well known within their circles and within the village. This ghost that was meant to happen, and all the nun and the coaches, so people were a little bit perturbed from going now and visiting the rectory. But it still needed a new reverend. Then we have Reverend Guy Eric Smith. He moves in 1928. He's there with his wife, and almost immediately they start hearing strange things. The servant bells that have not been used for years and are disconnected start ringing in the dead of the night. Again, keys falling out the locks. Things falling from the top floor and landing on the balcony and smashing. Some rather bizarre events. Then one day, Mrs. Smith is cleaning the library when she opens up a cupboard when she finds a round package tied up in brown paper. She places it on the table and she opens it up, and it's a human skull. Don't know how I'd react about that myself. It completely freaked me out. What I find bizarre about this, right, you've had 2 other families live there and none of them found this skull. I just find that a bit strange. What they do, they take it over to the church and Reverend Smith buries it with a service in the church grounds. Some people believe that this is where the strange events shift from Borley Rectory to the church, and I'll talk about the church at the end because I actually film inside the church and I've got my own little take on that and some information that I come across that may explain some things. But it didn't stop the events going on in that house. If anything, it seemed to make things even worse. Now the next section is a little bit confusing, depending on what reports you read and the different timelines that are out there. But what I understand, and this is probably the average story, is that Reverend Smith and his wife made contact with the Daily Mirror, and they wanted to be connected to the Psychic Research Society. Instead, they sent a reporter there called DC War. He went there and first of all almost pretended to be from the society, and then suddenly worked out that he was actually a reporter that didn't really go down too well with the family. While he was there, he observed a few things that didn't convince him that this place was haunted. But that's not what he reported in the Daily Mirror. He went back and reported this house as, so active, so haunted, the most haunted house in England. This did feed back to a certain person called Harry Price. Now, Harry Price wasn't a part of the Psychic Research Society. He set up his own one because they had different conflicting views. Now, Harry Price was a debunker, really. So he would go there and go to psychic evenings and seances and debunk them while they were actually taking place. A bit like Harry Houdini, who he was actually friends with at one point. Harry Price was able to spend all his time researching the paranormal and debunking things. He married into a rich family and a rich wife, and this is where I've gone wrong. That's why I've got no money. It's just no, but you know, that's quite lucky. My wife doesn't watch these videos. I'll tell you what she does. She puts them on her phone, plays them, puts them on mute and leaves her phone on the side so it plays through. I know what she does. She turned around and said, "Oh, your video's really good." I asked her about them. She couldn't answer a question about them. So she doesn't know what I'm saying about in these videos. Sam, maybe you want to watch this one. Back to Harry Price. He turns up at Borley Rectory. They are over the moon that somebody of a reputation has turned up to look into the events that are going on. It wasn't long before Harry started witnessing certain things happening. While they were there, almost immediately, they nearly got hit by a candlestick. But listen to other people. There's a gentleman called Alan Wainscraft. Years ago, he's probably passed away now, but he done an interview with Michael Aspel TV show, where he turned around and said that Harry Price was a bit of a showman, that you couldn't always take his reports as factual. The thing was, Alan looked after Harry Price's collection at the University of London, so Harry handed over all his documents to that university. I've actually reached out to them myself to see if I can get access to those documents, the original documents, not just the ones that have been put online, because I think it'd be fascinating to look at that work. I don't think I'm ever going to get the opportunity to do it, but it's worth putting it out there. After spending a few days at the Rectory, Harry Price went back and made a big report, put it out there in the newspaper, and it brought even more attention to the rectory. The Smiths had had enough. They actually moved out. But also, I think the church had sort of had enough of this stuff going on, and nobody wanted to go there to be the reverend of that church. The house was left alone for quite a period of time. Then we get Reverend Lionel Foyster and his wife Marianne. They move in, and let's say that his wife was a lot younger, young enough to be his daughter. She was bored. She wasn't suited for this lifestyle of sitting in the country. They were from London. They liked the hustle and bustle of the area. This is a young lady. She had nothing to do. But she did like the paranormal stories. Now, with Harry Price coming in and out of the picture, more reports started to happen in this house. The events escalated to Marianne waking up and saying that she's finding rocks under a pillar, that things would fly at her and just miss her. There's lots of weird things that went on around Marianne. But then things started to happen to the Reverend himself. His collar that he had taken off was thrown at him. While he was sitting down in the lounge, a lump of coal comes spinning across the floor, and then a stick flew just over the top of his head. I do believe that he was a little bit suspicious of his wife. Then we get a independent witness of someone that's got quite a strong character. This is Guy Lestrange. He is actually a local barrister. He comes over for tea. They're sitting down in the lounge and the door's all shut behind them. But they start hearing something smash on the floor on the other side of the door. They open it up to see crockery smashed on the floor. They're quite shocked by this. They clean it up, they go back and sit down. They're quite puzzled where it's come from. As they sit back down again, there's another really loud bang and smash. They quickly open up the door. A load more cups and saucers are smashed outside that door. Now, there's no one else in that building apart from them three. This would rule out the wife having something to do with it. Then there's a little bit that he writes where he says he sees items floating in the air in front of him. Candlesticks, cups, all this, which is very strange for someone of that character to report that if he hadn't actually seen it. He had a reputation to keep. He was a barrister. So it's hard to understand why he would write a piece in a paper that would pull his reputation into question. But the Foysters had had enough. They decided they were going to move out. This left the rectory empty. In steps Harry Price. He walks in, takes a year's lease out on that place, and spends the time setting up experiments within that building. Now, Harry Price's time at the rectory lasted a lot longer than the year that it was originally meant to be. And during that period of time, he put an advert out to take on not just like-minded people, but scientists to come and look around and set up their own experiments within that building. He took on 49 people to come and do that. They didn't all turn up at once. They would get their time slots and come to experiments. One of these was Charles Wintour. He applied and got accepted. He went there with the mind that he wanted to sort of debunk what Harry Price was putting out. He believed that there was a chance that Harry Price was bigging up the findings and not being totally truthful. When he got there and he set up these experiments, one of the ones that they'd done was to put sellotape across the door with hair on it to make sure nobody could go into that room. And when they returned, they walked into that room and there was writing on the wall. Now, Charles says that when he was looking at that writing on the wall, he could actually see the writing being drawn at that time. So he put some credibility into what people saw at Borley Rectory. I'm not saying that all of it was correct, but from a skeptic's mind that he was quite shocked by seeing this. But unfortunately, he can't get past the fact that Harry Price's work has been questioned again and again and again. He states there's over 2,000 haunting experiences within that building. from nuns walking around to black shadows walking down the pathways to footsteps being heard when there's nobody in the building to items being thrown across the floor to these lights that were seen out the window. There's one evening when he was outside, he could see lights coming through the window. He sent his friend up into the room, and the friend said there was no lights on in that room, but Harry said he could still see the light from the outside. That could be reflection of the glass from something else. It could be the moon, it could be a star, it could be anything. But Harry put that down as a paranormal experience. There's 2,000 reports from Borley Rectory stated as paranormal experiences that I guess, and I really do believe, if you look at over half of them, you're going to be able to debunk most of them. Then we come to the 27th of February 1939. A very bad day for Borley Rectory. Now, the first rectory burnt down. That is why the new rectory was built. The new rectory burnt down on that evening. Depends who you believe here, it was either an accident or it was arson. So you have Captain W.H. Gregson. He had taken on the rectory with the sole purpose of making money from it. A gimmick, a conjuring house, a skinwalker ranch. There's some of you just getting mad at me right now out in these buildings, but sorry if you don't like it. There's not much I can do, but yeah, one day I may do a big thing on the skinwalker ranch, okay, and then you can all have a go at me about it then. But he was there to make money, and he was quite honest about this. He didn't hold back. He sees it as a business opportunity. He wanted to set it up and let people come in and investigate it, like the conjuring house, and make a load of money out of it. It burnt down, and eventually, after another 10 years, it got demolished. You'd think that'd be the ending of all the paranormal stuff, but even when there's ruins there, there's a famous photo of a floating brick. Some people say that the brick isn't floating. There's actually stuck on a bit of metal coming out of the ground, and it just seems to be hanging there in mid-air, but it's not. Other people say they can see a nun in the windows of the burnt out building. There's all these confusing little things that go around the area. Once the land was being cleared, Gregson didn't give up the idea of making money out of it. He got funding for people to come up and strip the land down and dig down to see if they could find any bones. Now, the idea being is that during the period of time that all this stuff was going on, a seance had been done, and it predicted the burning of this building. And apparently it said that there was a buried nun underneath the ground, and I think they come up with the name of Mary or Marion or something like that for this nun. Gregson gets all this land cleared, and they dig down and they come across these bones. Now, the first thing is, the first person to bring those out is a farmer. He looks at it and goes, "It's a pig. It's a pig skull, a jawbone of a pig skull." Gregson's like, no, that's human, it's human. He takes it to his own pathologist, who turns around and says it's a human skull. Now, all the locals all believe it was a pig skull. So much so, it gets refused to be buried in the church, and he has to go off to a different church to be buried, because all the locals just know that this was a pig skull. But it was recorded down in the records that this was a human bone find. And you can get a lot of that when you come into Borley Rectory. There's a lot of these things that don't add up. People got into it. You know, you've got the Reverend's wife that was definitely faking some of it. You've got the 4 daughters that say they've seen a nun, but at the same time, they took a photo and they said it was a nun in this photo. But they described the nun as wearing all these dark clothing. But in the photo, it looks like just a young girl in a dress is in white. So again, it poo-poos that. But this is why I didn't want to do Borley Rectory. It's so well reported, and there's always a controversy about it. If you want to tarnish Harry Price's name, if you want to belittle the most haunted house in England, then you're not going to make friends. But I just think that there's a lot of people out there that agree with me, so I'm not on my own on this particular location, unlike the cage. Now, a lot of people do believe that Borley Rectory is mainly a hoax. But that said, we've got the church. Okay, so the church. We've got to remember, this church is 12th century. And there's a chance that maybe it was built on something else before that, so it's got a lot of history around that ground. If you take out Harry Price and some of the other people that are a little bit suspicious from what I've just told you, you're still left with the original stories of Borley Rectory. And that, the original families that first lived there. Even the 4 daughters with the nuns. Their stories had no outside influence to make them come up with these stories. People at the church over those years and since then have always turned around and said that they hear footsteps going through the graveyard up towards the church door. They also say that inside the church itself things get thrown around and the organ gets played. Looking into some of the other investigations that have been done at that church, the BBC went now with sound engineers and they set up an investigation overnight. I think it's in like the 70s, and they did pick up some weird noises across the floor, some banging, tapping that they couldn't explain. Taking their word for that, you got to remember back in the 70s, everyone believed the BBC was trustworthy. From the way things change, innit? It's like, but they did. The people trusted the BBC. So when they watched this programme and these weird noises were happening, people started to believe the church was haunted. But on top of that, you've got local people there that would say that they'd be sitting in that church and the organ would play when nobody was in there. Other people turn around and say that they were outside the church and they heard the organ play when the church was locked up. What we do know was that 2 boys did confess of hiding in that church and throwing stones when people were in that church to make them think it was haunted. One of them also confessed to hitting the keys on the organ when people were in there on their own to scare them. So we do have that going on. There's another thing in that church that brings people to think that it is haunted. So inside the church, you've got the Waldegrave family tomb. And it does seem a lot of these paranormal events that happen inside the building happen around that tomb. So people said they've seen somebody standing by that tomb and they've disappeared. Other people turned around and said they hear tapping on that tomb when they're on their own. Not even that. Other people said they've been sitting next to the tomb with other people and they hear tapping sounds coming from the tomb. Now, not as if it's somebody inside the tomb trying to get out, they hear tapping on top of that tomb. The thing is, this is also the reverends and the vicars say that they hear and see these things inside that church. Over the decades, they're the ones that have reported these strange things happening. Some blame it on the skull that has been buried there, that has brought over the energy and the ghosts from the rectory to that place. But there's also the possibility that in the olden days, these churchyards and their graveyards were much bigger. That skull that was found over at Borley Rectory could have just been found in the grounds outside, and maybe that in olden days, in the 12th century, those graveyards were a lot wider, and that is where the burials were happening on the site of where the rectory is. Now, of course, there is this speculation about the rectory being built on the site of an old monastery. I say when they dug it up, they didn't find no foundations beyond the 1550s. So it sort of puts that to bed that there wasn't really anything there. You'd expect a 12th century monastery around the same time as that church. But I will say that, I was lucky. I went there on a day when the church was open. I was able to walk in and have a look round, and I didn't film too much in there. I walked around the graveyard, had a look. My focus was on the footpath, to be truthful. There's a lot of reports of these ghosts walking up and down the footpath. You look at the church, yeah, you've got the 12th century section tower, and then there's add-ons around it. Now you've got these Georgian add-ons around the outside of the building. So it's had some maintenance done and all that. So you're not looking at a forgotten church. That brings into question some of the other reports. People said when they've been in that churchyard, they get a very strong smell of sick, vomit, or embalming fluid. Now this has been reported over many years. I find it very strange that embalming fluid would be smelt. I know, working in the photo industry for 10 years, that our stabiliser was made from embalming fluid, formaldehyde, and what that smelt like. And I wouldn't really put down to a sick smell. But is there a chance that something was rotting in the area? What I will tell you is that during my walk around the village, I did walk over a load of rotting apples, and they smell like sick. So maybe when people have smelt this, it could be the wind picking up the smell of the apples, flowing across the road and floating into the graveyard, and that is what they're picking up on. I think, to sum up, I think it's fair to say I don't struggle with Borley Rectory being haunted or having ghost stories with it. I do struggle with what it become once the likes of Harry Price got in there, and the vicar's wife that was making stuff up, and she admitted that she made this up. In a later interview with Peter Underwood, she admitted that she embellished the stories, and yes, it was her putting the pebbles under her pillows and things like that. So she admitted that. So you take those out of it, you've still got those original stories that laid the foundation of what was to come. Now the nun, this ghostly nun, these daughters were convinced that they see her. The 14 children before that said that they could see faces in the windows. These are the original ghost stories that I think you have to judge Borley Rectory on, and not what went after that period of time. Anyway, it's a complicated story. It's a long story. I've tried to compress it. I've got some bits wrong, got the timeline wrong, I had to go back, redo it. It's a story that's got a lot of twists and turns, a lot of interference. I didn't want to make it. I've made it. It's like Pluckley. I know I don't want to go and film Pluckley, and I know that I'm going to end up going to Pluckley, and don't know what that video is going to be like. But this isn't a time slip video. The time slip videos go well, and I get more subscribers from that. But please show this one some love. Give it some thumbs up and some likes and some hype. And coming up to Halloween now, so your comment this week will be, tell me your favourite scary movie. I think I have asked that before, but we've got so many new subscribers now. So tell me your favourite scary movie. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.